So we are going to begin a new parak, and really a new section of Pesachim. The Korban Pesach was brought on the 14th day in the afternoon, as the Torah says that you should bring the Korban Pesach on the 14th, and the daily Korban was also brought in the afternoon. Every day, in the morning and in the evening, there was a Korban Tamid. The Tamid meaning the constant. The Korban Tamid was brought every single day in the morning, a lamb and a lamb in the evening. As the Torah says, Bein ha'arbayim, that there is a mitzvah to bring the Korban in the afternoon as well. The Korban Pesach, as opposed to every other Korban that was brought in the Beis HaMikdash, it always had to be brought between the two Tamids, between the two Tamidim, the Korban Tamid, the daily Korban, the morning and the afternoon. Every day, all the Korbanos would be brought after the first morning Tamid was brought, and before the Tamid was in the afternoon was brought. Korban Pesach was brought after that. However, after the Tamid was brought, meaning after it was shechted, you'd have to do the preparation for it and bring it on the Korban, and there were other mitzvahs that needed to be brought, such as menachos. There were various meal offerings, and the menorah being set up, and so you need a time in the evening after the bringing of the Tamid as well. So this Mishnah is going to tell us that the system for the daily Korban was the system for the daily Korban was that every single day there was. Sorry, let me switch this screen here. The system for the daily Korban was that at 8.5 hours into the day is when they would bring the Korban. Now, just understand today's daf, we're going to have to understand the system accounting. The day was divided into 12 equal parts from the beginning of the day to the end of the day. So the day hours were divided into 12 parts. And then midday was at 6 o'clock, if you would look at it that way. So if you imagine the day is from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. and 12 noon is midday, that you would have 6 hours in the morning and 6 hours in the afternoon. Now, obviously, that's Shabbos equal hours of 60 minutes per hour. However, in a summer's day, you would have the day begin at perhaps 4 a.m. and end at 9 p.m. So that gives you an additional 5 hours that would have to be divided amongst the 12 hours. So you could end up with halachic hours, or sha'os zmanios, the hours based on the time of the season. So your hour could end up being an hour and a quarter, an hour and 20 minutes. But those are halachic hours. Nevertheless, your day would still end at midday. Your day would be still split by 12, and midday chatzos is 6 hours into the day and 6 halachic hours. So for demonstration purposes, and just to understand what the Mishnah is talking about, we're just going to assume that it's an equal day. 6 a.m. is when the day begins, day hours begin, and 6 p.m. is when the day would end, and noon is exactly 6 hours into the day. So generally, the Korban Tamid, the daily offering in the afternoon, would be brought 8.5 hours into the day. This is all year round. 8.5 hours into the day is when the Tamid would be brought, on account of that you wanted to give people an opportunity to bring their own offerings. So people who had made promises and made donations would come throughout the day and donate it, and it would be brought, and it all had to be brought prior to the evening Korban. the evening tamid, the daily evening offering. However, it wouldn't be any later than 8.5 hours into the day, which would be 2:30 in the afternoon, because you needed another 2.5. You needed another about an hour to take care of the tamid itself. After it was shechted, you would have to skin it and bring its parts together and clean it and bring it up onto the altar, on the mizbeach. And so you needed an hour until 9.5 hours into the day, which would take us about 3:30, leaving 2.5 hours into the day to do the rest of the things that are needed in the Beis Hamikdash, with the menorah being prepared and lit, and the mincha offerings that came along. So there were enough things that needed to be done. So you'd never leave less than those 2.5 hours at the end of the day, and giving a half hour and giving a full hour for the care of the tamid itself. And so there's a list of things to do. So you always left some time in the evening just to finish up all the karbanos and all the mitzvahs that were done in the Beis Hamikdash before the end of the day. So the daily carbon would be brought 8.5 hours into the day, or in the way we explained it, it would be 2:30 in the afternoon. However, on Erev Pesach, because you needed to leave time for the Pesach offering, the lamb that was brought on Erev Pesach for each family group, or for each group of people having the carbon together, as we will learn later that it has to be pre-designated groups. So there were a lot of carbon Pesachim that had to be brought. And so on Erev Pesach, you would actually bring it at 7.5 hours into the day, meaning at 1:30, an hour and a half after noon, is when that you would bring the tamid, the daily offering. This way you had enough time after that to bring all the karbanos, the Pesach that Bnei Yisrael would bring. However, if it was Erev Shabbos, Erev Pesach was also Erev Shabbos. It means the first day of Pesach was going to be Shabbos. And that night you were not allowed to roast your lamb after it was shechted. So you would have to roast it all before Pesach came in. So you need enough time not only to shecht your carbon, the carbon Pesach, but also to roast the carbon Pesach. So they would move it back even an hour earlier to a half hour past noon, 6.5 hours into the day, meaning 12:30 in the afternoon, they would bring the daily carbon, giving enough time after that for people to bring their Pesach carbon, as well as to roast the carbon after that. So that's our Mishnah. And the Gemara is going to deal with some other brises which talk about this concept. But that was just an introduction to our Mishnah. Yes, Michael.
So I mean, there was a mind-boggling amount of work that had to be done. It's almost inconceivable that it couldn't have been done.
Daily or for the carbon Pesach?
Erev Pesach.
Yeah.
Because they had to bring Chagiga also. I mean, it was a lot of livestock and a lot of sacrifices. What about the Oilas Riyah? They brought that Erev Pesach, or they had to bring that the next day?
That can be brought on the next day.
On the next day. It's just unbelievable how much. I mean, we think getting ready for Pesach is crazy now. It's boggles the imagination.
Yeah, you had to be ready a day or two earlier. Okay, so let's begin the Mishnah. And Tamid nishchat b'shmona u'mechza. The daily carbon in the afternoon would be typically brought at 8.5 hours into the day. As we explained, that means about 2:30 in the afternoon. If we're on a equinox day, okay, on a day that 6 a.m. is the beginning of the day, 6 p.m. is the end of the day, noon is halachic noon. So then at 2:30 in the afternoon, or 8.5 hours into the day, 6 hours of the morning, 2.5 hours of the afternoon, that's when you would begin bringing the carbon Pesach, meaning that's when it was shechted. And it was brought onto the Mizbeach by 9.5 hours into the day, an hour later. Whether it's because that's when it had to be done, or because that's approximately how long it took to take care of it, is discussion in the Mafarshim. So at 9.5 hours into the day, which is 3:30 in the afternoon in our standard time, that's when he would bring the carbon onto the altar, onto the Mizbeach. But Arvei Pesachim, however, on the evenings of Pesach, meaning before the day before Pesach, the 14th of Nisan, where you had to bring a whole bunch of karbanas, the Pesach, for so many people in the afternoon after the daily tamid, the evening tamid. Nishchat b'sheva mechza. So then you would move it back an hour, and 1:30 in the afternoon, 7.5 hours into the day, that's when you would shecht the daily tamid, v'kar b'shmona mechza, and it would finally be brought on the mizbeach at 8.5 hours into the day. Bein b'chol bein b'Shabbos, and that's true regardless whether it's weekday or Shabbos. And the Gemara is going to address this at length today. However, if the first day of Pesach is on Shabbos, meaning Erev Pesach, the day before Pesach is also Erev Shabbos, is Friday. And so you're not allowed to shecht, you're not allowed to roast that lamb that you're bringing for your Korban Pesach at night, because you can't do it on Shabbos, because it's not necessary for the mitzvah. That's something that's particularly an individual way of eating it, even though the mitzvah is to eat the Korban Pesach, but nevertheless, it is something that you could do before Shabbos and is not necessary for the Korban, for the actual service of the Beis HaMikdash, so it doesn't supersede Shabbos, so you have to roast it before Shabbos. So you need enough time after the daily Tamid to also bring the Pesach and also roast the Pesach for thousands and thousands of people. So therefore, the Talmud was moved back to a half hour past noon, 6.5 hours in the day. So Erev Shabbos nishchat b'shesha mechza, 6.5 hours in the day, meaning 12:30 is when you would bring the carbon, the daily carbon. V'karav b'sheva mechza, and then you would bring the daily Talmud onto the mizbeach, onto the altar, at 7.5 hours into the day, and the Korban Pesach would be brought after that, Pesach Acharov. The Gemara now challenges, asks, how do we even know this? What's the basis for all this? Amar Rabbi Shua Levi, the Amakra, Rabbi Shua Levi says, because the Pasuk says, the one lamb you will make in the morning, meaning you would bring the morning daily offering of one lamb. And the second lamb of the two daily lambs that were brought as a carbon tamid, as the daily, as the constant carbon, taseh bein ha'arbaim. You will make literally between the evenings. Now, between the evenings, the Gemara in Zvachim on Daf Yud Aleph has a discussion as to what this could mean. But over here, the Gemara is going and saying what it means is the afternoon itself is called evenings, from when the sun begins to go to darkness, meaning afternoon, until when it actually goes to darkness, nighttime. That's called the evenings, from when it starts leaning to when it actually is at the evening. So that's Bain and Bain Ha'arbaim, between the evenings, mean between noon and sundown. So if you split the 6 hours between noon and sundown, you have 3 hours. If you give 1 hour for the actual doing of the carbon, the process of making the carbon, shechting it and taking care of it and putting it on the mizbeach, it takes an hour. So you're left with 5 hours, 2.5 hours before you start and 2.5 hours after you start. And if the meaning of Bein Harbaim is between the evenings, from when the sun starts setting, meaning right afternoon, it starts heading downward until when it actually sets, the in-between would be 1 hour, 2.5 hours on either side. That gives you the 8.5 hours in the day, 6 hours into the day is noon, plus 2.5 hours. That's 8.5 hours into the day begins your midpoint, and give it an hour of work on the carbon tamid, and 2.5 hours after that till evening. So that's the way the Rabbi Shimon Levi explains it. Split it between the two evenings from when it starts leaning to evening until it actually goes down. 2.5 hours on one side, and 2.5 hours on the other side, with the remaining 1 hour to do the mitzvah, and 1 hour to do the carbon tummy. This is the way Rabbi Shimon Levi explains how we got to our Mishnah's number of 8.5 hours into days when you do the carbon tummy. To which Rava asks a basic question. Masav Rava, if that's true, that this is the Torah obligates the time, the Torah by stating bein ha'arbayim, between the evenings, means specifically split it, and 8.5 hours into the day, meaning 2:30 in the afternoon, is when you have to start the carbon tummy. So how do we make it earlier on Erev Pesach? Erev Pesach, you move it back an hour to 7.5 hours into the day, and actually bring it on the Mizbeach at 8.5 hours in the day, bein b'chol bein b'Shabbos, whether it's weekday or Shabbos. Now, the Isal Kadaitich b'Shmoina Mechza, the Oraisa, and if you tell me that 8.5 hours in the day is a Torah obligation, why is it that you make it any earlier? So what if you can't fit the carbon Pesach afterwards? The time for the Talmud is set by the Torah, and that's it, and you got to work it out. The implication of Rava here is, as he's going to say, is that it cannot be that the Bein Arbayim, between the evenings, actually means split it midway, and that's the time that the Torah is stating. Because if so, then you can't move it. It's set by the Torah. Elam Rava. So rather, Rava says you're right that Bein Harbayim means the afternoon, but it has to be any time in that afternoon time. Elam Rava mitzvah tamid machine natu tzalali erev. The time of the carbon tamid is any time in the afternoon. Bein Harbayim means in that afternoon when the evening has set, when the sun begins to go down. And here there's a great machlokes between Rashi, Rabbeinu Hananel, and others. And in Rashi itself, it's unclear whether the actual time is 12:30, 6.5 hours into the day, and their extra half hour after Chatzos, after midday, is a part of the Torah obligation. That's when the Torah obligated should start a half hour later, on account of that's when you can the sun is actually visibly creating shadows. So that's evening. Before that, it's still midday. Or is it a really a minute past midday is already the time for evening? That's when the sun is heading towards setting. However, the most people can't tell. So a half hour is in order to be able to recognize when the shadows are visible from the sun having gone down a little bit, and then you're able to know that it's afternoon. But really, if we were if we were good astrologers, we would be able to set the time for exactly when noon is, and you would be able to bring the carbon already then. In any case, so Rava says the mitzvah is from when the sun has begun to set. That's Bein Arbayim, and any time in that time is enough. However, we typically do it in the afternoon, is midway in the afternoon, to give enough time afterwards to do what needs to be done, and enough time beforehand to do what needs to be done. So my time is, so what's the reason that any time in the afternoon is okay? The Amakra Bein Arbayim, between the evenings, Me'idna the Maskil Shim Shalom Yarif. From when the sun begins to go down, to set, to be down in towards evening, that's when you can start bringing the carbon. Hilkach b'shayim es hashana, and therefore on all other days, the ikan adarim and adavas, there's an obligation to bring the offerings that people had promised and donated. So we need to give them time. So we can't just end at midday. We have to give a few hours afterwards for them to do it, but not too late, as we talked about it in the introduction and in the Mishnah, because you need time afterwards to do some of the daily offerings and to take care of them after the Talmud. So we left 2.5 hours in the evening to complete the day. 2.5 hours for people to bring their own offerings, and then the 1 hour for the Tamid in between. Rachmana Amar, and why do everybody's offering have to be brought before the daily Tamid is brought? Amar, because the Torah said, Aleh chelvei hashlamim. Upon it, you bring the fats of the offerings, of the shlamim offerings. Va'amar Mar, and the teacher had said, Aleha, upon it, hashleim kol karbanos kulam. You have to complete all the karbanos, meaning every carbon that is brought in the day, as besides for the carbon Pesach, which we'll see a discussion later as to why that supersedes this obligation. But Aleh hashleim kol karbanos kulam tells us that upon the daily offerings, the one in the morning, on it you bring all the daily offerings, and it's closed and ended with the daily afternoon offering. So therefore you have to push it off 2 hours and end up doing it at 8.5 hours into the day to give yourself enough time to allow people to bring their carbon. However, Rabbi Pesachim, on the Erev Pesach, the Ika Pesach Acharav, that there's also the Pesach offering afterwards. And there's a lot of that. So Kadmina Le'Sha'achas, you give an extra hour in the evening after the Tamid to allow for people to bring their carbon Pesach. So therefore you do it 7.5 hours into the day, meaning at 1:30 in the afternoon, you bring the Tamid. Chaler Pesach Lias Erev Shabbos, however, it's also Friday. The Ikanam, it's Liasa, we also have to do the roasting of the lamb, the Pesach offering. Shabbos, as we explained, that doesn't supersede Shabbos because it's a personal need of, even though it's a mitzvah or bring the offer to eat the carbon Pesach, that's a part of the mitzvah. However, this could be done before Shabbos. And since it can be done before Shabbos, you're roasting it in the evening is a personal need, and that would not supersede Shabbos. So we set it back to its original obligation, meaning the first time that you can actually bring the carbon tamid b'sheish umechza 6.5 hours into the day at 12:30 in the afternoon. That's when you bring it on Erev Shabbos, and a regular Erev Pesach you bring it at 7.5 hours into the day, and on a regular year, a regular day every day of the year, you bring it at 8.5 hours into the day. So either 12:30 in the afternoon when it's a Friday, when Erev Pesach is Friday, 1:30 in the afternoon when it's a regular Erev Pesach, and a regular day of the year, it's at 2:30 in the afternoon. The next Gemara is going to bring a machlokas between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. And we're going to have 3 versions of understanding of what that machlokas is, based upon some other obligations as well. So every Shabbos, the showbread, the lechem hapanim, the 12 breads that were on the shulchan, on the table in the Beis Hamikdash, would be taken out with the new ones replacing them, and the bread that had been sitting there for a week would then be split amongst all the Kahanim, and that was done on Shabbos in the afternoon. As a part of that process, the offering, every carbon that you can eat, one section of it has to first go to the Mizbeach. So on the table, there were 2 bazichen, 2 bowls, if you would, of frankincense, and that would be its offering that was brought to the Mizbeach, and then the breads were eaten. The Shnei Bazichen had to be offered as well on Shabbos. Additionally, on Shabbos, we know there's a Musaf, and Musaf offering that has to be brought as well. The Musaf offering is brought before the Tamid, before the daily offering. As we've said, every carbon has to be done before the afternoon offering, the daily Tamid, besides for the carbon Pesach. So the Musaf had to be done, and also the Musaf ideally should be done from noon and on, not before noon, because by the Musaf it says that it should be brought during the day, and since it doesn't say morning, it says by day, then it should be noon and on. That's the optimum way, but it would be kosher even in the morning, but that's not the best way to do it. So these would also give us time constraints for Shabbos, because we also have the Musaf and we also have the Bezichin. And as we'll see, there's a machlokes whether the Musaf comes first and then the Bezichin, which are the frankincense bowls brought from the showbread, from the lechem aponim and the shulchan on the table to the mizbeach. If you first have to do the Musaf, which cannot be done before 6 hours a day before noon, and should not be done. And then afterwards, you have to do the Bezichin, the showbread, the lechem aponim offering. So that gives you an additional time constraint on Shabbos itself. If, however, you are of the opinion that the Bezichin can be done in the morning, the frankincense bowls taken off of the table onto mizbeach for the lechem apanim for the showbread can be done in the morning, that gives you more time because the musaf can be done after that at noon or after. So that's going to be another factor that comes in over here as well. So Tana Rabbanan, the Brisa taught, Kisidura bechol kach sidura b'Shabbos. As its time is on a weekday, so too, as its organization, its order is on a weekday, so too it is on Shabbos. And the Brisa doesn't explain what are we talking about. As what's order on a weekday, it is ordered on Shabbos. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel. This is the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel. However, Rabbi Kiva Omer Kisidura be'erev Pesach. And Rabbi Kiva says, no, as it is done on Erev Pesach. What is done like it's done on Erev Pesach? So it's unclear. And so we're going to have three versions of explaining this brisa: Abaye, Rava, and Rav Barula. Amar Abaye. So Abaye says, Hachika Amar. This is the meaning of this statement that Rabbi Shmuel says, just as it is, its order is on a weekday, so too its order is on Shabbos. And Rabbi Kiva says, as its order is on Erev Pesach. So Abaye explains, just as a weekday Erev Pesach is done at 7.5 hours into the day, meaning 1:30 in the afternoon is when you bring the carbon. So too on Shabbos, it's the same. Shabbos won't change. Weekday and Shabbos of Erev Pesach don't change. The only change, as our Mishnah says, the only change is going to be on a Friday. But Shabbos, meaning if the first day of Pesach is Sunday, and like this year that we're going to have, where the Erev Pesach is going to be on a Shabbos, it's the same as any other weekday, and you do it at 7.5 hours into the day, meaning at 1:30 in the afternoon, the daily offerings brought, and after that, the carbon Pesach. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel, that's Rabbi Shmuel's explanation. And Rabbi Kiva says, no, Kisidura be'erev Pesach, shechalios be'erev Shabbos. No, it's like Erev Pesach, meaning it's like Erev Pesach, that's a Friday. That Shabbos, Erev Pesach, and Friday, Erev Pesach are going to have the same halacha. Kach Sidura b'Shabbos. And that's the way it is on Shabbos. Umasnit in the Ketani bein b'chol bein b'Shabbos. And our Mishnah that said that the order is 8.5 hours into the day, a regular day, is when you bring the Talmud. And on 7.5 hours into the day, meaning 1:30, is when you bring it on Erev Pesach, whether Shabbos or weekday. That's the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel, that the offering of the Korban Pesach on Shabbos is like a regular weekday, 7.5 hours into the day, meaning 1:30 in the afternoon. And what's the basis of the machlokas of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel? Basically, what we talked about before, whether the musaf needs to be brought before the bazichin, before the frankincense bowls brought off of the lechem apanim, off of the showbread table onto the mizbeach, or or it can be even brought before the musaf. Rabbi Shmuel says musaf and kaidum lebazichin. Rabbi Shmuel says that the musaf has to come before the bazichin. It has to come before the frankincense bowls, and therefore, avad lahula musaf and b'sheish. So you have to do the musaf at noon, which is the earliest appropriate time for the musaf, and then after that, ubazichin b'sheva, and then after you divide all the showbreads, after you finish the musaf, an hour, bazichin, you do b'sheva at 7 hours in the day. You start dividing the showbread because you bring the the lechem apanim, you bring the bazichin, the bowls of frankincense to the mizbeach. So the earliest time that you can bring the daily tamid after having done the musaf at noon, and the splitting of the showbreads and bringing the offering of the showbreads, the 2 bowls of frankincense, the shtei bazichin, onto the mizbeach at 7, at 1 in the afternoon. Now at 1:30, you'll be able to start bringing the daily offering after which you're going to bring the carbon pesach. However, Rabbi Akiva Sava Bazichin Kollel Musafim. Rabbi Akiva says no. You can bring the frankincense bowls already in the morning before the musaf. So therefore, at 11 in the afternoon, 5 hours into the day, 11 in the morning, 5 hours into the day, I can bring the 2 bowls of frankincense, the bazichin, off of the shulchan, off of the table, and bring that. So I musafin b'sheish, and the musaf can be brought already at noon exactly. So therefore, at 6.5 hours into the day, at 12:30, I can already bring the afternoon tamid. Now, typically, we say that the reason you push off the carbon tamid to later in the afternoon is because people are bringing their daily offerings, or their own personal offerings and gifts. But that's not brought on Shabbos. So there's no need to push it any later. So as early as you can bring it and leave enough time for the Pesach in the afternoon is a good way to go. So that's Abaye's explanation of the statement of Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. That Abaye says, Abaye says that the conversation is about on a Shabbos of Erev Pesach, and the question is in regards to sharing the bringing the offerings in the afternoon. So Rabbi Shmuel says, according to Abaye, Rabbi Shmuel says you bring it at 7.5 hours into the day because you need time for the bazichin, the frankincense offering afternoon, after the musaf. So the musaf earliest can be done at noon. And then you also have the bazichin. So you're only going to get to the daily offering at 7.5 hours in the day. However, Rabbi Akiva says, no, the bazichin can be done in the morning. The frankincense from the table of the lechem apanim, the showbreads, can be brought in the morning. So you can be brought at 11 o'clock. And at noon exactly, you're going to bring the Shabbos musaf. And therefore, Rabbi Akiva says at 6.5 hours into the day, I can already bring the daily the daily afternoon carbon in order to give enough time to bring the carbon Pesach after that. That's Abaye's explanation. Maskif la Rava. So Rava challenges, he says it's a nice explanation, but it doesn't fit the words. Midi Rabbi Akiva kisidura be'erev Pesach shechala is be'erev Shabbos katani. Rabbi Akiva just says the way it's done on Erev Pesach, it is done on Erev Pesach, but it doesn't say anything about Erev Pesach that falls on a Friday. And you're saying that the carbon on the daily tamid on Shabbos is brought like it's brought on a Erev Pesach that's Friday, but it doesn't mention anything about Friday. It just says like you bring it on Erev Pesach. Elam Rava, so therefore Rava says another explanation. Rabbi Yishmael says, like you bring the carbon every single day, that's the way you would bring it on an Erev Pesach that's on Shabbos. So we're still talking about Shabbos that's Erev Pesach. However, it's like any regular day, so to Erev Pesach. So in our Mishnah, when we said 8.5 hours in a day, meaning 2:30 in the afternoon, you bring the carbon every day. And Erev Pesach, you bring it at 7.5, whether it's Shabbos or not. That would change. And Rabbi Shmuel says, no, on Shabbos, you actually bring it like you bring it on a regular day. It doesn't make a difference that it's Erev Pesach. And the reason for that, he's going to introduce a new worry, that since you can't do the rinsing of after you shech the carbon Pesach, you can't rinse it. And so you have to leave it as is until the evening when you start rinsing it and getting it ready to roast. And so the meat may start going bad because it's just sitting there for too many hours. And so on Shabbos, you're going to push it off back to the regular day, 2:30 in the afternoon when you bring the Talmud. And so the Korban Pesach, even though it's going to be a tight squeeze, but you're not roasting it that day anyhow. So you have more time. So we're going to crunch the time for the afternoon offering, for the Pesach. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Akiva says, Kesidura Erev Pesach. No, every Shabbos of Erev Pesach is the same as a weekday Erev Pesach. And therefore, our Mishnah that says that you bring it at 7.5 hours in the day, whether weekday or Shabbos, is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva. And now, what's the basis of the machlokas? Since you can't rinse the innards on Shabbos, so there's a concern whether the meat will go sour, it'll start going bad. Rabbi Yishmael savach hashina lemichmar bisr. That Rabbi Yishmael is worried about the meat warming up. But Rabbi Akiva savar lechashina lemichmar bisr. Rabbi Akiva says we're not worried about that. So now we turn to Nun Ches Amud Beis 58b. So iloi chashina. So he says, if you're not concerned about it, Rabbi Akiva, so why do you do it at 7.5, at 1:30 in the afternoon? Do it at 6.5, at 12:30 in the afternoon. As we saw earlier, there's the musaf that comes at noon, and if you need to bring the frankincense after that, you need time for that. So therefore, the musaf is exactly at noon. And the frankincense at 7 hours into the day, meaning at 1. And therefore 7.5 hours into the day, meaning 1:30 in the afternoon, is when you bring the tamid. Maskefla Rabbi Barula. So Rabbi Barula says, great, Rabbi Akiva, Rava, you explained Rabbi Akiva very nicely. However, you still didn't fit your explanation to the words of Rabbi Yishmael. Midi kesidura b'chol kach sidura b'Shabbos b'Erev Pesach. Did Rabbi Yishmael mention Erev Pesach at all? No. All he said was, as you do it in the weekdays, how you do it on Shabbos. But he didn't mention Erev Pesach. Kach sidura b'Shabbos stomach tani. He just says, as you do it on a weekday, you do it on Shabbos. And he doesn't mention Erev Pesach at all. Ela Amar Rabbi Barula. So therefore, Rabbi Barula says, we have a third explanation. Hachi kutani kesidurei b'chol de alma. Just like a regular weekday, the afternoon offering is brought in at 8.5 hours into the day. So too, kach sidura b'Shabbos de alma. So too, every Shabbos. And all Rabbi Shmuel is saying is a regular Shabbos is like a regular weekday. 8.5 hours into the day is when you bring the daily offering. And he's not talking about Pesach at all. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel. And to that, Rabbi Akiva, and to that, Rabbi Akiva says, actually, we're going to bring the korban, the daily offering on a Shabbos, a regular Shabbos. We're going to bring it an hour earlier, like we do on Erev Pesach. The kach sidur b'Shabbos. So too, every the alma, every regular Shabbos is going to be the same. Michael, you have a question? No. Okay. In our Mishnah, that says weekday and that on Erev Pesach you bring the korban at 7.5 hours into the day, meaning 1:30 in the afternoon is the daily offering, and after that the korban Pesach is everybody's opinion. Nobody disagrees about that. Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Akiva are talking about a regular Shabbos. Divrei Kollel. So b'makom impalgi. So what's the basis of the machlokas between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva? B'gzeres nadar medavos kimipalgi. Whether you bring the korban, we talked about that every day. The reason you bring it at 8.5 hours in the day, meaning you have 2.5 hours in the afternoon before you bring the daily offering, the tamid, in order to give people an opportunity to bring their own korbanos, their gifts and promises to be fulfilled in the afternoon. So you give them 2.5 hours from noon until 2:30 in the afternoon to bring it. But on Shabbos, they're not bringing it. But do we say, well, but we want to keep it the same time every day so that nobody makes a mistake on a weekday and brings it early, and then people will lose the time to bring their korban. So Rabbi Shmuel, Shabbos you keep Shabbos the same as a weekday so that nobody messes it up on a weekday. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Akiva says, no, we're not concerned. On Shabbos, it's always a different system, and so you can bring it earlier on Shabbos as well. So So then back to the same question, let him do it at exactly a half hour afternoon as soon as you're allowed to bring the afternoon offering. Why does he even push it off to 7.5 hours, 1:30 in the afternoon? Do it at 12:30. And he follows the opinion that the musaf comes before the frankincense, the bowls of frankincense from the showbreads. So at noon, you have to bring the musaf of Shabbos, and then you need time to also bring the showbread bowl of frankincense and to split the lechem apanim, the showbread amongst the kahanim. So you need an hour and a half for those two. Musaf b'sheish, bazicha b'sheva. You have the mincha, the musaf at 6, the bazichin at 7. So that the earliest you're going to do the afternoon offering, the tamid, is going to be at 7.5 hours a day, 1:30 in the afternoon. So these are the three explanations that we have for the statement of Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. The first one being, Abaye says the concern is we're talking about a Shabbos Erev Pesach. Is Shabbos Erev Pesach like Friday Erev Pesach, or Shabbos Erev Pesach like a weekday Erev Pesach? Rabbi Shmuel says 7.5 hours like a weekday. Rabbi Akiva says 6.5 hours like a Friday. Rava says no. We're talking about a Shabbos Erev Pesach, and the question is, do we do it an hour later? Rabbi Shmuel says you do it an hour later so the meat doesn't start warming and go bad. And Rabbi Akiva says, I'm not worried about that. However, the third opinion says, we're not talking about Erev Pesach at all. We're talking about a regular Shabbos. And Rabbi Shmuel says, just as a weekday, you bring the carbon, the daily offering at 8.5 hours into the day in order to give time for people to give their own offerings, so too on Shabbos, so as not to confuse the days. And Rabbi Akiva says, no, you bring it earlier because there's no tamid to be brought. But however, you need time to still bring the musaf and the bazichin and the bowl of frankincense, and so you do it at 7.5 hours into the day. That's the machlokas. Now we're going to bring a challenge to this, and then we'll end this section of the discussion of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel. So we ask a contradiction. Tamid shel kol hashana kula. Every single day, the offering of the afternoon, it's brought at 8.5 hours in the day, meaning 2:30 in the afternoon, and it's slaughtered and it's brought on the mizbeach at an hour later, 9.5 hours into the day. However, and on Erev Pesach, it's brought back 1 hour. If it's a Shabbos, if Erev Pesach is Shabbos, it's just like it happened on a Monday. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel, that's Rabbi Shmuel. However, no, it's like an Erev Pesach. What does this mean? That if it happened on Shabbos, it's like it happened on Monday. So according to Abaye, it makes sense that he says, just like a Monday Erev Pesach, you do it at 7.5 hours into the day. So too on Shabbos, you do it 7.5 hours into the day. That's Rabbi Shmuel's statement. However, Ella l'Rava kasha, but according to Rava, where Shabbos would be an hour later. So what does it mean? It's like Monday. It's not like a Erev Pesach is a Monday, meaning just a regular Erev Pesach day, or rather, it's like a regular Monday, meaning it's like a regular weekday, just like a regular weekday. The afternoon offering is brought at 8.5 hours into the day. Erev Pesach Shabbos is also done that way. Mesave, we ask another contradiction. Chalias b'Shabbos k'zedura b'Kol Kula. That Shabbos is like all year. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel, that's the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Akiva k'zedura b'Erev Pesach. Rabbi Akiva says like Erev Pesach. The Alma Bishlam el Rava Nichas. According to Rava, makes sense that he says Shabbos Erev Pesach is like a weekday Erev Pesach, meaning it's at 8.5 hours into a weekday period. So it's at like 8.5 hours into the day. Ela Abaye Kasha, Abaye says that it's like a weekday Erev Pesach at 7.5 hours. So that's a problem. Not like it's all year round, but like every year's Erev Pesach. Shabbos Erev Pesach is like every other year Erev Pesach. Kulan Divrei Rabbi Shmuel. That's the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Akiva Erev Pesach Kach Shechalis Erev Shabbos. That just like Erev Pesach that comes on Shabbos, on a Friday, that it is at 6.5 hours into the day. So that ends that conversation. Bez Hashem, tomorrow we'll continue with learning how do we know that Erev Pesach and Erev Shabbos are earlier carbon time.